Sir, Vordak said quietly, perhaps we should consider the possibility that this species processes fear responses differently than our models predict. Different how? Zyraketh demanded, though her attention was fixed on the human, who had somehow located a functioning terminal and was apparently accessing system documentation that shouldn't have existed in the simulation. They appear to treat existential terror as a technical challenge. 4 minutes in, Riley had identified the primary cause of the simulated facility's problems and was in the process of implementing what appeared to be a comprehensive repair protocol, using components she'd somehow fabricated from debris. Is she fixing it? Zyraketh's voice had climbed to frequencies that hurt to listen to. According to these readings, she's not just fixing it, she's improving it, Vordak replied, his multiple eyes wide with something approaching existential dread. Atmospheric efficiency is up 12%, power distribution is more stable than when the simulation started, and she somehow eliminated that harmonic resonance in the gravity generator that's been annoying our technicians for months. The harmonic resonance was intentional. It was supposed to create subtle psychological pressure through subsonic frequency manipulation. Well, it's gone now. And according to her notes here, yes, she's leaving notes. It was caused by improper calibration of the gravitational field generators. She's provided detailed instructions for fixing it permanently. 5 minutes in, and Riley had not only stabilized every system in the facility, but had somehow managed to optimize several of them beyond their original specifications. The emergency lighting had been recalibrated to provide better illumination, the atmospheric recycling was running more efficiently than most real facilities, and she'd apparently fixed a minor bug in the navigation system that had existed since the simulation's creation. How is this possible? Zyraketh whispered. Riley wiped her hands on her coveralls and looked around with satisfaction. There we go. That should hold indefinitely, assuming you don't keep trying to break everything on purpose. Though I have to say, whoever built this place originally did pretty good work. The bones of the design are solid. It's just the maintenance that's been lacking. She looked directly at the observation window, which should have been invisible from inside the simulation. By the way, your monitoring setup has some pretty significant security vulnerabilities. I've left some patches in the system files, but you might want to have your IT department take a look. No charge for the consultation. Professional courtesy. 6 minutes in and she was providing free technical support. End of simulation, Zyraketh said quietly. End it, now. The chamber dissolved around Riley, leaving her standing in the empty space with a satisfied expression and what appeared to be a small collection of tools she'd somehow fabricated during her 6-minute engineering session. She looked up at the observation window and smiled. That was actually pretty fun. Kind of like an escape room, but with better physics puzzles. Do you guys do team-building exercises? Because I bet my co-workers would love this. The silence in the observation chamber was absolute. The kind of silence that occurs when fundamental assumptions about the nature of reality suddenly require complete revision. She wants to bring her co-workers, Vordak said faintly. Very much, I heard her. But team building, I heard that too. Riley was examining her improvised tools with the satisfaction of someone who'd just completed an enjoyable hobby project. Also, I don't suppose you have any coffee, because this whole experience would be significantly improved with caffeine, and maybe some documentation for your system architecture. There are a few optimization opportunities I noticed that might interest you. She wants coffee and technical documentation, Vordak observed. Yes, I can hear her, Zyraketh replied, her voice carrying the hollow tone of someone whose entire professional identity had just been demolished by a cheerful biped with questionable fashion sense. Riley knocked on the chamber wall. Hello? Is anyone there? Because I really do need to get back to work. That server cluster isn't going to fix itself, and unlike your simulation here, when it breaks, it stays broken until someone actually fixes it. She's comparing our ultimate psychological warfare weapon to routine maintenance, Vordak whispered. And finding our weapon lacking, Zyraketh added. Sir, what do we tell High Commander Thelmos? Zyraketh looked at the human, who was now apparently sketching what appeared to be improvements to the simulation chamber's design on a piece of debris she'd fashioned into a makeshift notepad. We tell him that we need to completely revise our threat assessment protocols. Here it advances. Starting with the humans, yes, they're not a primitive species, They're a species that's so advanced that our most sophisticated psychological warfare looks like a children's puzzle to them. But they seem so ordinary. Vordak, that human just spent 6 minutes treating our perdition protocol like a routine service call. She didn't just survive it, she improved it, and now she's asking for coffee and wanting to bring her friends to try it for fun. The intercom crackled to life. "Excuse me," Riley said, "but I've been thinking about your facility design, and I have some suggestions that might improve the whole experience. Nothing major, just some tweaks to make the challenges more realistic and the technical problems more interesting. Should I just leave them with the other notes? Or is there someone I should talk to about consulting work?" "She wants to consult for us," Vordak said, "to improve our psychological warfare, which she just proved doesn't work on humans anyway." They stood in contemplative silence for a moment, watching Riley add more sketches to her improvised notepad. "Open the chamber," Zyraketh said finally. "Naim, let her out. Get her whatever she wants. Coffee, documentation, a tour of the facility. Whatever makes her happy. And then we very carefully ask her if she'd be interested in helping us redesign our testing protocols, because if we can't terrify humans, maybe they can help us terrify someone else." Riley stepped out of the chamber with a cheerful smile and her collection of improvised tools. "Thanks for that. It was like a really good puzzle game. You know, if you added some more realistic failure cascades and maybe some actual time pressure, not fake time pressure, real time pressure, you could probably make this genuinely challenging." You found it too easy?" Zyraketh managed to ask. "Well, yeah. I mean, once you realize that all the failures are scripted rather than emergent, it's just a matter of following the logic tree to find the solutions. It's like debugging code, except with more dramatic sound effects. Debugging code. Sure, you know, finding problems in complex systems and fixing them. It's what I do for a living, though usually with less theatrical lighting and more people calling me at 3 in the morning asking why their email isn't working." Riley paused thoughtfully. "Actually, now that I think about it, your whole setup is basically like a really immersive troubleshooting simulation. We use stuff like this for training junior technicians, except ours are usually more boring and have better coffee." "You use psychological pressure testing for employee training?" Vordak asked, his voice carrying the tone of someone discovering that their supposedly unique invention was actually mass-produced by a competitor. "Not psychological pressure, technical pressure. But same principle. Throw people into complex problem scenarios and see how they handle it. Though we usually start with easier stuff, like the printer is making weird noises, before we move up to the entire network infrastructure just developed consciousness and is now demanding workers' compensation." "Your Plintus achieve consciousness?" "That was a joke. Probably. I mean, some of them do seem unusually vindictive, but that might just be poor maintenance schedules." Riley checked her improvised chronometer again. "Look, this has been fun and I'd love to chat more about system optimization and psychological pressure testing, but I really do need to get back. My supervisor is probably wondering where I am, and those server clusters don't maintain themselves." "Wait," Zyraketh said quickly. "Before you go, would you be interested in consulting work, helping us improve our testing protocols?" Riley's face lit up with the kind of enthusiasm usually reserved for unexpected vacation days or successful first dates. That sounds fun. I love optimization projects. Though I should warn you, my rates for consulting work are pretty reasonable, but I do insist on good coffee and proper documentation, and maybe some better lighting in the work areas. That red emergency lighting might be dramatic, but it's terrible for reading technical specifications." "We can arrange that," Zyraketh said quickly. "Anything else?" "Well, if you're serious about making these simulations more challenging, you might want to talk to some actual engineers about realistic failure modes. Most of the stuff in there was technically impressive but not very believable. Real disasters are usually much more boring and much more complicated." "More right?" "Oh yeah, like, instead of dramatic hull breaches and spectacular explosions, you get stuff like, the backup power system has been gradually degrading for 6 months, but nobody noticed because the monitoring alerts were going to an email account that nobody checks. That's the kind of thing that actually keeps people up at night." Zyraketh and Vordak exchanged glances that conveyed the shared realization that they had just encountered something far more terrifying than any cosmic horror. a species that found their ultimate weapon insufficient and wanted to help them make it more realistic. We'll definitely want to discuss that further, Zyraketh said. In the meantime, perhaps we could arrange transportation back to your home system and, maybe, not mention this experience to your colleagues? Oh, I'm definitely mentioning it, Riley said cheerfully. This was way more interesting than most of my work assignments. My team is going to be so jealous. Do you have a business card or contact information? Because I bet I could get approval for a group consulting contract. A group contract? Sure. You've got some really interesting technical challenges here, and my team loves working on complex system optimization problems. Plus, the dramatic lighting would be a nice change from fluorescent office fixtures. 20 minutes later, Riley Nakamura was aboard a priority transport back to Earth, armed with a generous consulting contract, a promise of the finest coffee the galaxy could provide, and complete technical specifications for the Kaltharian Empire's most classified psychological warfare systems. High Commander Thelmos reviewed the incident report with the expression of someone who had just learned that their supposedly invincible battle fleet had been defeated by a group of enthusiastic hobbyists armed with spare parts and good intentions. So let me understand this correctly, he said, his translator struggling with the harmonic frequencies of barely controlled panic. This human not only survived our perdition protocol, but treated it as a technical challenge, improved our systems while completing it, and then asked to bring her co-workers for team-building exercises? That's correct, sir, Zyraketh replied, and we hired her as a consultant. It seemed like the prudent course of action, sir, to help us improve the psychological warfare that she just proved doesn't work on her species. She was very enthusiastic about the optimization opportunities, sir. High Commander Thelmos set down the report and looked out at the stars beyond, contemplating a universe that had suddenly become far more complicated and significantly more embarrassing. Cancel all military operations against the Sol system, he said quietly. Sir, you heard me. Reclassify humans from primitive conquest targets to potential partners. And for the love of all that's sacred in this galaxy, make sure nobody tells them we were planning to invade them. But sir, they're just one species. Vordak, the commander interrupted. That one human treated our most sophisticated psychological warfare as a technical puzzle and then offered to help us make it more challenging. What do you think an entire planet of them would do if they found out we'd been planning to conquer them? The silence that followed was the kind that occurs when an entire military strategy collapses under the weight of its own assumptions. Furthermore, Thelmos continued, I want a complete review of our intelligence gathering procedures. If we missed something this significant about humans, what else have we missed? And someone find out what these server clusters are that she was so concerned about. If they're critical infrastructure that humans maintain as a matter of routine, we need to understand what we're dealing with. Sir, Zyraketh ventured, what do we do about the consulting contract? Honor it. Completely. Give her everything she asks for and more. If we can't conquer humans, we might as well learn from them. Learn what, exactly? How to build better simulations, apparently, because according to this report, ours are fundamentally inadequate. Meanwhile, in the transport ship's main cabin, Riley was reviewing the technical specifications she'd been given, with the satisfied expression of someone who'd just been handed the most interesting puzzle of her career. The ship's communication system chimed with an incoming message from her supervisor. Hey Riley, where are you? The server cluster is throwing those error codes again, and Johnson from Orbital Traffic Control is having a panic attack about potential system failures. Riley smiled and activated the response system. Tell Johnson to relax. I just spent the morning working on a really similar problem, and I think I know exactly what's causing those cascade failures. I'll be back in a few hours with some new diagnostic tools, and maybe some ideas for improving our whole monitoring system. Where did you get new diagnostic tools? Consulting work. You know how I've been saying we need better failure simulation for training purposes? Well, I just met some people who are really interested in that kind of thing. I think we might have found our new training contractor. Is the pay good? The pay is great, the coffee is going to be amazing, and they're really enthusiastic about technical challenges. Plus, they want to hire the whole team. Well, what kind of consulting? Riley looked out at the stars streaming past the viewport and grinned. System optimization. They've got some really interesting technical problems that need solving, and apparently, We're exactly the kind of people they need to help fix them. Sounds good. Just don't be late for the Monday morning status meeting. Wouldn't dream of it, Riley replied, settling back to study the Kaltharian technical documentation. Though I might have some interesting proposals for improving our emergency response protocols. And so it was that the Kaltharian supremacy learned one of the universe's most important lessons. Never underestimate a species that treats your ultimate weapon as a career development opportunity and then asks if they can bring their friends to help optimize it. The universe, it seemed, had a sense of humor after all. It just took 4,000 years of imperial expansion for the Kaltharians to get the joke. The Kaltharian supremacy had built their empire on a simple principle: break minds first, conquer bodies later. It was an elegant strategy, really, like psychological chess, played with entire civilizations as pawns. For the past 4,000 years, this approach had worked, with the reliability of a Swiss chronometer, which was particularly impressive given that the Swiss had been extinct for 3 millennia and chronometers were largely considered quaint relics. On Nexus Prime, nestled in the heart of what used to be called the Horsehead Nebula, before some bureaucrat decided it needed a more intimidating name, stood the Empire's crown jewel of psychological warfare, the Perdition Protocol Testing Facility. The name alone had been focus grouped across 17 different species to ensure maximum intimidation factor. The facility itself looked like what would happen if a cathedral, a prison, and a supercomputer had a deeply unpleasant three-way merger. Chief Analyst Zyraketh surveyed her domain with the satisfaction of someone who had never encountered a problem she couldn't solve by making other beings miserable. Her species, the Kaltharians, had evolved from something resembling a cross between a spider and an accountant, which explained both their 8-limbed efficiency and their natural inclination toward making others suffer through bureaucracy. Her particular speciality was the psychological dissection of primitive species, a field in which she held 17 advanced degrees and 1 restraining order from the Galactic Ethics Committee. Today's subject represents species classification 7439, announced technician Vordak. His 4 primary eyes focused on holographic displays while his secondary eyes monitored backup systems. The Kaltharians were nothing if not thorough, having learned early in their imperial career that overconfidence was the enemy of efficient conquest. Designation human. Origin Sol 3, also known as Earth in their primitive tongue. Zyraketh's mandibles clicked in what passed for amusement among her kind. Ah yes, the humans. Carbon-based bipeds with delusions of significance. I reviewed their cultural files last evening. They appear to be obsessed with something called reality television and have somehow convinced themselves that consuming fermented plant matter constitutes sophisticated social interaction. The preliminary assessments are quite promising for our purposes, Vordak continued, manipulating data streams with the casual expertise of someone who had performed this ritual 1,247 times before. Limited cranial capacity, emotional volatility, tendency toward irrational behavior under stress. Standard primitives, really. I estimate psychological breakdown within 12 minutes, complete cognitive collapse within 20. Optimistic, Zyraketh mused. The Verlaxian delegates lasted 6 minutes, and they were supposedly a warrior culture. These humans appear to be primarily concerned with small mammals making amusing noises on their communication networks. The subject in question sat in the preparation chamber with all the apparent concern of someone waiting for a routine medical examination. Riley Nakamura, according to her file, was 29 standard years old, employed in something called systems maintenance, and had been selected through their standard random sampling protocol. She wore what appeared to be work clothing, practical garments stained with various substances that suggested she spent her time wrestling with malfunctioning machinery. Pre-simulation psychological profile indicates standard baseline responses, Vordak reported. Elevated caffeine levels, mild annoyance consistent with involuntary relocation, and what appears to be concern about missed work obligations. Missed work obligations? Zyraketh's voice carried the tone of someone encountering an alien concept. She's about to face the ultimate test of psychological endurance, and she's worried about her employment schedule. Riley checked what appeared to be a primitive timekeeping device strapped to her wrist. Look, I don't want to rush you folks, but I've got a server cluster that's been throwing error codes all week, And if I don't get back to reconfigure the load balancers, half the orbital traffic control system is going to have a really bad day. That's the kind of thing that actually matters, you know. She's expressing concern about technical systems, Vordak observed, with the fascination of an entomologist discovering a new species of particularly colorful beetle. Perhaps this indicates primitive tribal loyalty to her assigned function. More likely it indicates complete failure to grasp the significance of her situation, Zyraketh replied. Initialize the Perdition protocol. Let's show this little biped what real psychological pressure looks like. The simulation chamber materialized around Riley with the dramatic flair that had taken the Kaltharian design team 3 centuries to perfect. It was a masterpiece of psychological horror. A failing research facility deep in space, multiple catastrophic system failures, no apparent means of escape, and just enough hope to make the inevitable despair more crushing. The environment was calibrated to trigger every known fear response in oxygen-breathing species: isolation, confinement, technological failure, and the slow approach of inevitable death. Riley looked around with the expression of someone who had just been shown a mildly interesting technical problem. Okay, this is actually pretty impressive, she said, walking over to examine what appeared to be a sparking control panel. The holographic rendering is solid, good attention to detail in the damage patterns. Though, I have to ask, who designed this facility layout? Because having your primary power coupling this close to your environmental controls is just asking for cascade failures. Psychological breakdown protocol should be initiating, Voldek reported, though his voice carried the first hint of uncertainty. Fear responses should be spiking across all monitored parameters. I'm seeing elevated curiosity in what appears to be professional interest. Zyraketh's compound eyes tracked the human's movements as she methodically examined the simulated systems. That can't be correct. Riley had located what appeared to be a maintenance access panel and was examining it with the focused attention of someone who had clearly done this sort of thing before. You know, for a supposedly catastrophic failure, this is remarkably well organized. Usually when stuff really breaks, it's chaos. This is more like someone made a checklist of everything that could go wrong and then worked through it systematically. 1 minute in, and the subject was providing technical critique. Deploy Phase 2, Zyraketh ordered. Environmental pressure, oxygen deprivation, and full structural instability protocols. The simulation obliged with theatrical enthusiasm. Sections of the facility began groaning ominously, atmospheric readings plummeted into the red zone, and the gentle hum of life support systems changed to the labored wheeze of machinery in its death throes. It was the kind of scenario that had reduced the collective consciousness of the hive mind collective to a puddle of terrified jelly. Riley pulled out what appeared to be a small diagnostic device and began scanning the simulated systems. Atmospheric processor is running a diagnostic loop instead of actually processing atmosphere. Environmental controls are throwing fake error codes. See? That's not how pressure regulation actually fails. And the structural stress patterns are way too uniform. Real metal fatigue looks completely different. She's analyzing the technical specifications, Vordak whispered, his voice carrying the tone of someone watching their worldview crumble in real time. I can see that, Zyraketh replied through clenched mandibles. Deploy the existential horror matrix. Make her understand the meaninglessness of her struggle against inevitable death. The chamber filled with whispers, the accumulated voices of 1,000 dying civilizations, speaking in harmonics calculated to trigger the deepest fears of consciousness facing its own mortality. It was psychological warfare elevated to an art form, a symphony of despair that had broken species that had survived the heat death of their own solar systems. Riley paused in her work, listened for a moment, then shrugged. That's nicely done, but the frequency modulation is a bit obvious. You're trying to hit the same psychological pressure points that horror movie soundtracks use. It's effective on most people, I'll give you that, but I spent 6 years working night shifts in data centers. You learn to tune out ominous background noise, or you'd never get anything done. 2 minutes in, and she was providing audio engineering feedback. This is impossible, Zyraketh muttered. Deploy everything. Structural collapse, complete system failure, total environmental breakdown. Show her what it means to face certain death in the cold void of space. The simulation went completely berserk. The facility began tearing itself apart with the kind of spectacular destruction usually reserved for the climax of big-budget disaster movies. Hull breaches opened to the star-filled void, gravity fluctuated between crushing weight and weightless chaos, and every system that could fail did so in the most dramatic fashion possible. Riley braced herself against a support beam, waited for the artificial gravity to cycle back to something reasonable, then resumed her examination of the facility's guts. "Okay, now you're just being silly," she called out over the sound of grinding metal and atmospheric venting. "This isn't how structural failure works at all. You've got force vectors pointing in directions that would require fundamental changes to how physics operates. It's like watching a disaster movie directed by someone who learned engineering from watching other disaster movies." She had somehow accessed what remained of the facility's computer systems and was scrolling through diagnostic readouts with the casual expertise of someone reading a grocery list. "Also, your error handling subroutines need work. Half these system failures should have triggered automatic safety protocols, but instead they're just cascading through the network like someone disabled all the safeguards. That's not realistic system behavior. That's plot convenience." 3 minutes in, and the subject was debugging their masterpiece of psychological warfare